Hey everybody, this is Kelly. Welcome back to another edition of Ask a Therapist. Today we're going to talk about grief again. Since my last video on grief, I've gotten a number of questions from people. Large amount of them were caregivers for others. So by that I mean teachers, youth pastors, friends of people who are hurting right now. And a lot of their questions were, how do they support somebody who is openly grieving or struggling with whether or not to allow themselves to openly grieve during this time? I have by and large suggested that people go back and watch the first grief video because it does have some steps on how to really recognize and name and honor your grief. I think that's really important. Number one, for the person who is caring for someone who is grieving, but also to recognize in the hearts and lives of those who are grieving. So the number of questions I got and the ways that they were phrased really kind of led me in this direction of feeling like there's some things that I need to say that are going to sound a little bit harsh maybe, but they really are intended for the best. So one of the questions I got repeatedly was, what do I do for someone who is wallowing in their grief? And I understand the theory behind the question because you look at somebody who is grieving and you feel like they're not able to be productive and they're not able to move forward in their lives and all of that. I definitely understand the concern there. It's hard to watch somebody that you care about going through a process when you can't do anything to alleviate their suffering. And so I want to say that first, that I understand that this question comes from a place of wanting to care for someone else. Also, the discomfort that we have with watching someone else grieve is more connected to our own grief than to theirs. It's part of the human condition, some more so than others, to relate our circumstances to other people. And you see that from a pretty early age, from even like a middle school small group, right? You see them tell stories on top of each other when you're talking about something, and the stories don't seem to connect, but the reason that they say it is because one thing in the last person's story reminds them of an experience they had, so they want to share that experience with people. If you look at it from the outside, it looks like people are just talking about themselves and that's all they care about, but that is how they understand each other and their relationship to each other is through their own lens. And so I say that because that is something that shows up very, very early and continues through the rest of our lives. And it's important to know that because I don't believe that it's ever anyone's intention to impose our own expectations on someone else. I believe that it's almost always someone's intention to just want the best for the other person. But just like we love people in the ways that we understand love, we also support people in the ways that we understand support. And so if we are people who have not actually processed our grief, who have not actually done the work to allow ourselves the space and do some healing if that's an option right now, or to do some just being okay in that yucky messiness, it is going to be difficult for us to go and sit in the yucky messiness with someone else. I'm seeing a lot right now of people who are currently referring to when this is over, getting back to normal, using the phrase the new normal to describe what we're doing right now. All of that makes a lot of sense, but the measuring stick that we are currently using to gauge what's going to be after is incorrect because we still do not fully comprehend the during. There are people whose grief needs to be cyclical. Many people, their grief is going to be cyclical. They're going to initially grieve something they're missing, and then a little while they'll feel better and they'll, move forward and feel more hopeful. And then something will happen that'll trigger that grief again, and they feel like they're right back where they were. It's not a line. It's more like a slinky. Okay. So if you can picture like a spiral, like the slinky toy, you might be back in that feeling of grief, but time has moved forward and therefore your interaction with that grief is going to be different. And that's important to know because what applied to the grief before is not going to apply to the grief now. When caring for someone who is grieving, it is so, so important that we take that time to really identify our desires in having conversations with people. The conversation with someone who is currently grieving, whether they understand they are or not, does not have to be about next steps immediately. There are people who are just wired that way, and that's okay. There are people who need to get through and do and move forward and make a plan. And then when the danger is past, when things have settled down in whatever realm they're looking for things to settle down in, that's when they start to grieve. That's just their process, and that's okay. But imposing that process on everybody across the board is less than productive. We're all living in a weird in-between. We remember through a lens what was before, but our memory, honestly, is probably a little bit hazy right now. And we imagine what comes after, but we don't know when after even starts. When caring for those who are grieving, it is important that we are really hearing them. If they don't have the words to say how they're feeling, help them to find the words. If you just Google feelings wheel, there are so many words that can be used to describe how you are feeling. And if you're caring for someone who doesn't have those words, helping them to get those words would be really helpful. When you put a name on an emotion, it makes it less scary. Okay. Do you like horror shows, horror movies? If you watch a scary movie, things are the scariest when they're unnamed, right? The phantom behind the door, somebody knocks on the door and there's nobody there. That's more terrifying than you open the door and there's a person there, right? The intentions behind somebody doing something that is destructive to somebody, the noise that doesn't seem to be attached to anything, the things that are unshaped and unnamed are the scariest. When you name your emotions, when you help people to name their emotions, you're taking the power out of them, and the emotions become no longer the enemy, but an aspect of who we are. And that's so important, that we honor the emotions that we have as aspects of who we are. Our emotions are there to be helpful to us, and sometimes they're not, because we don't really have a handle on them, and that's a lifelong process. But getting to the place where we can understand our emotions as protective and productive, if they are understood, really gets us to a place where emotions aren't scary anymore and other people's feelings aren't scary anymore, because it's just their process and it's just who they are. So if I love somebody, even if I don't like their process, I'm going to love their process because it's theirs. Here's where this really comes down to. People are asking me questions that I cannot give them answers to, because it is individual, it is relationship based, and it is a longer span than do this, this, and this, and then the grief will be gone, or do this, this, and this, and then people will understand how to handle their emotions better. That's not the way this works. And I understand that walking away from some of these with practical information is key. I would love to be able to give that to you. The most practical thing I have to give you is, do not be afraid of silence, and do not be afraid to just be with someone. If you are a teacher, if you're a pastor, if you're a youth pastor, if you're a small group leader, if you are the collector of your friend group, right? The person who brings everybody together, getting everybody together and saying, how you doing? And not accepting a pat answer of, I'm fine, I'm surviving, living the life. Those answers that we give people because it's what comes out of our mouths, because we're so convinced that nobody actually wants to hear the real answer to that. Not accepting a canned answer from others, not giving a canned answer to others. Opening the door and showing a little bit of your own vulnerability will help people to know that it's safe to do that. For people who are in the midst of a trauma, it is hard to feel safe. As human beings, we have needs that need to be met. And one of them is connection. And that is one that's really hard to meet right now. And one of the best ways to connect as a human is not to assert ourselves into someone's situation, but to enter into a situation with someone and to sit in the corner with them and to observe, ask questions that help them to express themselves. Make it okay for them to say, I don't know. I don't know is an okay answer right now. Tell them it's okay if they need to take some time. Tell them it's okay if they need to contact you and communicate some of that confusion. I also want to talk to you about trauma. Understand, trauma is something that is talked about in a lot of different ways. One of the things I'm running into right now is people don't believe that they're in a state of trauma. A state of trauma is simply a disturbing or distressing event, okay? Something that has disturbed or distressed your existence. Doesn't that apply right now? Isn't that where we all are? And in being there together, we're also in a collective trauma where we are seeing maybe ourselves as fortunate because we only lost our job and we didn't lose a family member, right? But that someone losing a family member is no less tragic when you admit that losing your job is tragic, okay? It's not, there's not like a finite amount that gets distributed among a certain number of things, and then if yours falls down further on the rank, then you don't get anything. That's not how that works. All of these things are traumatic, and all of these things are emotionally disturbing. All of these things can be felt to the depth that they need to be felt in order to move forward into the healing of it. And so it's really important to not fall into the at least trap when you're caring for people who are hurting. And it's really important to not do that to yourself either. At least I still have my house. At least I still have food in the refrigerator. Being grateful for something is a fantastic exercise. It is necessary. It is important so that we understand perspective and we understand in the bigger picture what we do have. Those are all important things, but they are not the thing that is going to get you past a trauma. So I don't know. I may have just made a whole video that says, guess what? Just be there with somebody. It could have been that simple. But I just think there are things that we need to be aware of right now that are not being talked about because they're harder to talk about. Maybe it's because people that we're talking to don't have the words for it. But giving yourself grace and giving the people around you grace to experience what they're experiencing in their own way and understanding that their perspective is valid and their fears and their hopes and their dreams and their confusion, that's all valid. We all deserve the space to explore those things so that we do come out on the other side of the pain in a healthier way. Notice I'm not saying when this is all over, because we don't have to wait till this is all over to start dealing with these emotions. Maybe some of us do, but not everybody. And it's okay to wait. It's okay to not wait. What's not okay is to push our process on someone else because their process is not comfortable for us. So there it is. There's just a couple of tips if you are caring for someone in grief, in trauma. These are the things I hope you can employ in order to make those relationships better, in order to make that experience a little smoother, and in order to feel like on a very real basis we're connecting as human beings. I hope you are taking care of yourselves. I hope you're staying well, and I hope you're feeling. Take care. I'll talk to you soon.